What the hell is this? Seriously, what is this new lineup with ESPN Radio? I know ESPN is the worldwide leader in woke, but this network, it prides itself, as delusional as it may be, this network prides itself as being the worldwide leader in sports. If you are the worldwide leader, I expect you to be the leader on both radio and television. Problem with ESPN, they're not leaders on either platform. And after seeing this new lineup for ESPN Radio, they will never be the leader on radio. What the hell happened here? And that is a rhetorical question because I will tell you exactly what happened to ESPN Radio in this video. If you're under the age of 30, you really have no idea how legendary ESPN Radio used to be. When I was in high school and college, everyone listened to ESPN Radio. Everyone. We would get pissed off when the local sports radio station would broadcast lunch with Rufus and Doofus instead of the Dan Patrick Show. Hey, it's me, Rufus, and my brother husband Doofus. We are broadcasting live from Carl's Crab Shack, where the oysters are smooth and my caboose is freshly bruised. For years, ESPN was the unquestioned leader in sports radio. Mike and Mike in the Morning, which was my least favorite show in the lineup. Mike Squared was never my thing, mainly because both Mikes were literally squares. Mike and Mike always felt like corporate radio to me. It was too safe for my liking, but there is no denying the fact Mike and Mike, they were extremely popular. Mike Greenberg is one hell of a talent. Their chemistry was unmatched. And the disillusion of that relationship, it's one of the reasons that ESPN Radio has declined. Immediately following Mike and Mike in the Morning, Colin Cowherd, who in my opinion, best broadcaster in the history of sports talk radio. Colin Cowherd is an unbelievable talent. The other day, I talked about how very few people are irreplaceable. Most people are easily replaced. If local radio in Noodle, Texas replaced Rufus and Doofus with flatulating Fran and her one-man band, no one would notice. There would not be a change in the ratings. The same people who listen to Rufus and Doofus, they would listen to flatulating Fran play the classics with her boodle flute. Coming up next, Fran will play the classic ditty from Whoopi Goldberg, Fartin' and Fornicatin'. It didn't take ESPN very long to figure out Colin Cowherd, he is one of the very few who cannot be replaced. But following the herd was Dan Patrick. The departure of Dan Patrick in the late 2000s, that was the beginning of the end for ESPN Radio. Hell, it was the beginning of the end for ESPN, period. They didn't know it at the time, but ESPN, they lost most of their leverage that day because Dan Patrick, he proved that you don't need ESPN to succeed. When you're a star, ESPN needs you more than you need them. But following Dan Patrick would be Doug Gottlieb, maybe Dan Le Batard, Ryan Russillo, Scott Van Pelt. The afternoon lineup, it changed around, but it still featured stars. I guarantee you, most of you guys, if not all of you, you have heard of every single person that I have mentioned. And the reason you have heard of them is because they're stars. And they're all stars that ESPN created. No one had heard of Colin Cowherd before he got to ESPN. He was doing local sports in Las Vegas at a time when Vegas had no sports teams and the UFC wasn't mainstream. It has been at least a decade, maybe even longer, since ESPN has created a new star. Maybe that's what they are trying to do with this new lineup for ESPN Radio. Maybe ESPN is featuring a lineup of unknowns in a desperate attempt to create new stars. Hell, maybe they are trying to help families find their long-lost relatives. Looking at the names in this lineup, it looks like ESPN pulled faces off the side of a milk carton and put them on ESPN Radio. We are trying to help families. We are trying to reunite children with their long-lost parents. I guess ESPN failed to realize that faces aren't shown on the radio. But that will not be the only failure with this new lineup. As you're about to see, the new and improved ESPN Radio, it is destined for huge embarrassing failure. Make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Link to the second channel's in the description below. This morning on the second channel, we talked about ratings for the NFL playoffs. The playoffs continued the NFL's trend of declining ratings with several windows down double digits. So if you haven't already, head over to the second channel and subscribe. Headline at the Sports Business Journal: ESPN Radio unveils new national lineup of shows. I would imagine most of you missed this exciting announcement yesterday. It wasn't something that ESPN was exactly proud to promote, and with good reason. It seems like every 2 or 3 years, ESPN is overhauling the radio division, similar to what Comedy Central has done with The Daily Show since Travis Noah found a lifeboat and paddled away from the Titanic. ESPN's copied the strategy of Comedy Central by putting a rotating panel of huge embarrassing failures on ESPN Radio. Starting February 10th, the half-dozen affiliates who are still carrying ESPN Radio, they will begin their mornings with something called Unsportsmanlike, which is hosted by Evan Cohen, Chris Canty, and Michelle Smallman. Michelle Smallman? Who, and who? Obviously, I had to look up all 3 of these people. 2 of them are so unknown, Wikipedia has never heard of them. It didn't take me long to figure out why ESPN grouped them together. This trio perfectly meets the standards of diversity, equity, and inclusion. 2 men, both different races, with a beautiful white woman who just so happens to have blonde hair. Shocker! Apparently, this group has been together for a little while on ESPN Radio. 5 months ago, a segment from one of their shows was posted on ESPN's YouTube channel. In the past 150 days, they generated 1,900 views. Following this trio is something called Clinton Yates and Friends. What? Excuse me? That sounds like the name of a reality show on Bravo. Join us Tuesday for the Real Housewives of Clinton Yates, and we can't forget about the Friends. Yippee! I've never heard of Clinton Yates, so why in the hell would I care about his friends? Is this a matchmaking show? Is Clinton lonely and ESPN is giving him 2 hours on national radio so Clinton can find friends? Hey, it's me, Clinton. Good news, listener. I found a friend. Her name is Monica, and she invited me to dinner at the restaurant called the Oval Office. Now that Clinton has found a friend, ESPN is presenting its audience Joe and Q. I'm no expert in marketing, but when you're putting unknowns on national radio, it would probably help to include their names. No one has heard of Q Myers, much less Q. When I hear the letter Q, I think about questioning Quentin from LGBTQ Radio. I don't think about Joe and Q, who claim to be experts in sports betting. Translation, they lose a shitload of money. Anytime you see someone calling themselves an expert in sports betting, run! Out of the millions of people who bet on sports, less than 1% are actual experts. And you know what they're not doing? They're not giving away their edge. They're not giving away their picks on national radio. Next on the list is Freddie and Harry, also known as the Wet Bandits from Home Alone. KC, I thought that was Harry and Marv. Yeah, well, Marv went through a transition. He is now choosing to identify as Freddie. Freddie and Harry are former NFL receivers. Now, to his credit, Harry actually touched the field. Freddie had a 10-year career in the NFL with the vast majority of his time spent as a tackling dummy on the practice squad. But at least he played. That's more than I can say about the lead pretend NFL analyst at ESPN, Mina Kimes. Following the Wet Bandits are 8 more people who no one's ever heard of. I'm not even going to give you their names because the local Piggly Wiggly would think I was doing roll call, and I don't want to cause confusion. This is the best ESPN can do? Really? Just for comparison purposes, I'll give you the lineup for Fox Sports Radio. The Ben Maller Show, never heard of him. 2 pros and a cup of joe. Sounds like prostitutes working a day job at Starbucks. But Dan Patrick, Colin Cowherd, Doug Gottlieb, Cavino and Rich, I used to listen to them on satellite radio. The Odd Couple, which used to feature Rob Parker and Chris Broussard, they were excellent together. Now it's Rob Parker and some annoying dude named Melvin who doesn't know how to use the mute button. But Rob Parker is still good. Dude's been covering sports longer than I've been alive. He is incredibly entertaining when he unleashes on the modern NBA. Problem is, Melvin's mute button is always broken. But the point is, Fox has a lineup of stars. Fox has a lineup of people that are interesting, entertaining, while ESPN's lineup looks like the roster at CNN, filled with unknowns. The thing is, it didn't have to be this way. Like I said in the beginning, losing Dan Patrick, that was the genesis. But when ESPN lost Colin Cowherd because they refused to pay him and they refused to let him branch out into podcasting, that was the end of ESPN Radio. They thought they could replace Colin Cowherd with Bomani Jones. They have spent the last 10 years trying to replace Colin Cowherd. And what does ESPN allow their talent to do now? Podcasting and YouTube. The exact same thing that Colin Cowherd asked for 10 years ago, and ESPN refused to give it to him. Believe it or not, terrestrial radio is not dead. Unlike the business of mythical racism, talk radio, it is still thriving. 69% of audio news content consumed through terrestrial radio. 32% of talk radio shows consumed through radio. 61% of sports talk consumed through radio. Tens of millions of people are still listening to talk radio every day, myself included. Now, of course, I watch it on YouTube, but there are local sports radio shows that I listen to every day. Rob Parker from Fox Sports, well, that's national radio, but Matt Moscona, Bobby Hebert on WWL. People are still listening to radio. They're just not listening to ESPN radio, and who can blame them? Give me your thoughts on this. ESPN overhauls their radio division again. This is the second or third, maybe even the fourth time that ESPN's overhauled their radio division since Colin Cowherd left. Is this lineup destined for failure? Will there be a single star created in this lineup? Is anyone even still listening to ESPN radio? Let me know. Sound off in the comments below. Best way to contact me is through email, btlkc84@gmail.com. I'll see you guys later.